There is somebody that Tesla has sued for stealing their self-driving car data. The same company that is accused of having people that bring that technology to them, Xpeng, just got $1.5 billion on the New York Stock Exchange in an IPO. And I'm like, these guys are stealing technology, and that $1.5 billion doesn't go to the company, it goes to the PBOC, the People's Bank of China.
We still think of risk as digital risk. We still think of risk in the old days of, did I lock my front door? Unfortunately, what tends to happen is when we bring people inside a company, we automatically assume that they're good people. We've forgotten this whole problem about insider trading, about insider situations. Who has to know, needs to know, and should know? Right, those are the only people that need to know.
Is data security, and data being the oil of the 21st century, the thing that drives artificial intelligence and big data. We're spending $800 billion a year on defense, and we ought to be spending it on protecting the data of our citizens. Welcome to Generally Speaking. Today we have Chris Roberts, and we're going to talk about, hacking and cyber, and I don't know. Chris, you're going to have to tell me what all we're going to talk about, but I'm really excited about this conversation and to hear what you have to say. So thanks for coming on General Speaking. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, appreciate it, and absolutely honored to be able to hang out with you again and just basically shoot the shit for a while. It'll be fun.
Absolutely. That's what this is all about, is shooting the shit. So Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so obviously with the funny accent, been based over in the US for about the last 20 or so years. Came over.
I can tell that. It's definitely an American accent.
It stays civilized. It's gotten worse over the years. I go back to the UK, and everybody sounds funny there. So it takes me about a week to get the ear back in, and I'm good. Then I go up to see family up in Scotland, and all hell breaks loose because it's like a week later. I come back over here, and nobody can understand me for a few weeks.
Okay, so I got to ask you, do you know Rab Nesbitt?
Yeah.
So my buddy in pilot training was from Scotland, and he introduced me to Rab Nesbitt. Now Rab, I could never understand what the hell he said, but he was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, it's Billy Connolly was like it's like the early days of Billy Connolly when he was just pure Glaswegian, and you couldn't understand anything, and it just went on like that, and you're like, what the hell's going on? And it's like that. You come back here, and then people over here are like, slow down, speak American, please. But it's fun. It's good when you get stopped by the police, or like when the agencies pull you over or something like that. You just go into it. It's like, I do apologize. I'm ever so sorry.
Okay, you're going to have to teach me how to do that. I'm sure that would get me out of some scrapes.
Oh, it's useful. Speeding tickets across Utah when we're driving out to like DEF CON with like a whole bunch of alcohol, bunch of weapons, and everything else in the back of the car. I'm only allowed to do 70 here. I'm ever so sorry. I do apologize.
Okay, you got to invite me on one of these trips, because it sounds like the people that you hang out with is a lot different than the people I hang out with.
Yeah, we get the rough ones. It's kind of fun. It's so what ends up happening is everybody from like JSOC, SOCOM, like 10th Group, and everybody else, the ones that are the crazy geekish ones, end up back in our industry. So that same kind of rebellious, crazy mentality comes into it. And then we also get the ones that have come out of like anywhere in Virginia or the farm or anywhere like that, where they had all the constraints on, and all of a sudden they realize in the commercial world it's not quite so bad, and they're not going to get yelled at as much. And then all hell breaks loose, and it's just total amount of fun. And they're great, amazing people to work with, and quite honestly, their family on the civilian side is absolutely fantastic.
It's like the guys coming out of the air and gals coming out of the Air Force Academy when they're made second lieutenants. It's like, we're free. Those are the ones you have to watch out for.
Yeah, it's kind of cute to see, and then all this. Yeah, it's kind of fun. It really is. I love the security world. I mean, there's a ton that's driven nuts. There's a ton that we've got to fix in it, but there is a lot of camaraderie. And again, because I think so many folks have come out of former.mil.gov world, that there's just that no bullshit, let's just get it done mentality, and it's fantastic.
So what do you do now?
All sorts of things. I try not to annoy a couple of the agencies. I do my best to get up the nose of the FBI on a regular basis, which is kind of a fun sideline.
That's not hard to do.
No, it isn't. They're kind of fun to wind up. A lot of it's, so I kind of split my time. I do the civilized stuff, so the virtual CISO work, the consulting side of the work. I sit down, I work with organizations, everything from like artificial intelligence through to microbiology, nanotech, biotech, and just normal like deception technology and all that side of the world. I have a ton of work I do on the research side of the world as well. So we're looking at where the future of technology is going and going, okay, what's good, what's bad, what's ugly? What do we need to help industries understand? How do they understand how to do it? And a few other things. And then I still get involved in like pen testing and assessments. We actually just went up against a couple of the states' voting systems in the last couple of weeks. And to the credits of the states, they're listening, which is absolutely fantastic. It's really nice to see that they're actually stepping up and going, help us understand. So I get involved in that stuff every now and again. And I do a lot of talking and I do a lot of lecturing and helping.
So I mean, that's really interesting. So tell me, what's your assessment of where the states are at right now? Kind of generally speaking, because I'm sure you got good and you got bad. And
totally.
What's the average look like?
I think the states themselves are aware of the problems. They're aware of the issues. They obviously realize that this one's going to be really heavily scrutinized ones. The biggest frustration is still the issues with the actual voting systems themselves. And unfortunately, that falls at the feet of really 3 or 4 vendors. And those vendors have been told for numerous years that there are issues, challenges, problems, whatever you want to call it. And they spend more money on lawyers defending their position and putting money into the hands of DC in lobbying efforts than they do in actually fixing a lot of the problems. And that's pretty frustrating, but unfortunately, it's pretty normal for a lot of the industries.
So, that's generally speaking across the board. What I see is, a more of an effort to reduce the litigation surrounding an event rather than spending time to fix the problem. So, what would be, if you're king for a day, or in the case of the United States, you're president for a day, and you could say, hey, these are some things that I would do in the United States to fix this problem. What are some things that you might recommend at the policy level to get at some of these issues?
I think a couple of things. That's a really good question. A couple of things. I would definitely consolidate a lot of the audit and compliance reporting. I mean, I feel a lot of pity for so many people in this industry because they're sitting there and they are like, okay, I've got to do my quarterly PCI, I've got to do my HIPAA, my FERG. And by the way, every one of the darn states has got its own flipping PII stuff. I'd consolidate the hell out of that. We'd have one set of reporting constraints, and it wouldn't be a tick box and a checkbox thing. I think there would definitely be it's back to the golden rule, do by others as you want to do by yourself kind of thing. It's like, okay, what's the right thing to do? So that'd be one thing, definitely. There would be a whole lot of communication and collaboration involvements. One of the biggest issues in the industry, and you've probably seen this from coming out from the military side to the civilian side. In the military, if you screw up, the chances are you're going to put your hand up and go, hey, I screwed up. Everybody around me learned from my problem because otherwise more people will die. End of discussion. In the civilian world, we don't do that. I apologize, there's noise. They're drilling somewhere.
I thought there was a gunfight going on.
No, otherwise you'd see me, not this
or
table,
carjacking.
Yeah, we'd be under that table with, we'd be firing back, let's put it that way. In the civilian world, there's much more of a mentality of hunkering down, putting the lawyers up, and not telling people around you what's going on and what's wrong, what the problems are. We don't learn from each other's mistakes as effectively. So I changed that completely. We'd remove a lot of the litigious. Honestly, we'd probably put most of the lawyers in the field and bomb them, but it's an entirely separate discussion.
We don't need lawyers.
No, we need. There's a couple. There's some good ones.
Yeah.
There's some good ones.
So we'll keep a couple. The rest of them have to go into a field.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, they can become. Yeah, they can become spectators. That would be part of it. And then, honestly, a lot of the industry, I would, especially in the security industry, I would do a couple of different things. We'd have a much more robust apprenticeship thing, the ability to move people into this industry much more effectively. Again, you take the military. We work you in, we run you through a boot camp, we figure out what your mental level is, whether you're going to basically be cannon fodder or whether you're going to do, anything else along those lines. We're going to figure that out more effectively, and we will work with you. We will train you more effectively. So that pipeline in, we take most of the marketing teams and probably shoot them as well, to be perfectly honest, because if
so marketing and lawyers, they're out.
Oh yeah, they're done as far as I'm concerned. Because again, if you think about it, our job in industry, our job in security, we have one job. It's the same as military. It's to protect. That's it. Nothing else. There's no other job we need to do. It's simply protect people. But we don't do that. We spend so much time justifying our artificial intelligence, and it's better than everybody else's. And there's 10 other companies waiting outside your door to tell you that they're better than the person before them. And any company is just confused to all heck by who we are, what we are, and what we're doing. Simplify the hell out of that, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, there'd be a few changes coming down the line.
So one of the things that I've seen, and talking to industry from my perspective, is this idea, and you brought it up, of sanctuary. And so the way that I became more aware of the problem was, from a briefing that was put together by one of the top 5 audit firms that I was able to look at, where all the data was sanitized. But in this briefing was a number of vignettes of targeted attacks. They called them, little c cyber economic. I call them, or big C cyber economic. I called them little c cyber, big E economic, because the real attack was economic. Cyber was an enabler for the issue. And so what I came to understand is just exactly what you're saying. These companies have these problems, they have these attacks, and then they hide it. And they hide it for a number of reasons. And I almost want to turn that on its head and say, okay, if we're going to create this sanctuary, it ought to come with both carrots and sticks. In other words, the carrots are, if you fess up, we're going to give you a tax benefit, some kind of, and a immunity benefit. But if you don't, and we find out, you're going to get not only going to get slammed in taxes or penalties, you're going to potentially have prosecutorial issues going on. And I think that would provide kind of the openness and transparency. We have a thing in military aviation, actually in all aviation in the United States, called a hazardous air traffic report. And so if you have a traffic violation in the air, not good to have a traffic violation in the air, but if you have one, and as soon as you land, you as a pilot file a HAT, or a hazardous air traffic report, then you're basically given immunity. And the whole idea is to promote aviation safety. So I feel like that your point is, let's create an environment where we are being as open and transparent as we can about the problem, because the whole idea is to fix the problem, not to protect the company from being sued, not because ultimately, and this is where I think the Chinese Communist Party has us over the barrel. They look at the entire system and we want to protect the system. And in our society, each company is in essence their own Chinese Communist Party, and that's the only thing they care about.
Well, and that's huge, because again, think about, you hit the nail on the head. I land a plane, if there's an issue, it's reported, it's distributed. The planes behind me, the systems behind me, the architectures behind me learn very, very rapidly as to what's going on. Now, we have the ISACers and we have the infra guards and everything else, but just the time it takes to go from point A to point B and dissemination of that information and the intelligence behind it, it's just too slow. It's way too slow. So as an adversary, I break into you using an attack vector. I don't have to change my tactics because I know I can take out the next 10, 15 companies because nobody's talking to each other. And I also know, again, let's go back to military stuff. A perfect example is, wouldn't it have been nice to have known really early on that our F-35 plans were not exactly in our hands when we thought they were in our hands? Wouldn't it have been nice to have known to be able to course correct, to adjust, to understand, and all of the other criteria there, rather than finding out an exponential amount of time later and realizing that there's very little we could have done about it? Things like that are huge. But again, to your point, we are, this country is amazing and it's been very, very nice to me. But it's a cluster of 50 little countries inside one country, and it's like, good grief, we're all batting for the same freaking team. Let's try to all work more effectively together.
So, just that F-35 story that you mentioned, in your opinion, why wasn't that data encrypted? And so, because I have a hard time resolving in my mind why any company would take, its crown jewels, and that would, because what they do is they try to firewalls and this and that, but then the data itself is not encrypted. Can you just speak to that as a security professional? Why?
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, what will happen is, so I'll come into your organization and you have the crown jewels, and I'm like, hey, I can get to them. They're like, oh, we have compensating controls. Our legal team and our audit team have said, because we have those files in place, we're protected. We don't have to, because we have to use that data all the time. And because, unfortunately, there's still this fallacy that encrypting data is still complex. And there's so many ways to do it effectively. It's just ridiculous these days. And there's so many ways, even if you cannot encrypt it, there's so many effective ways to understand that somebody's inside your environment if you just take the time to do it. But people don't, or people rely on compensating controls, or unfortunately, so many companies still think that they're not going to be breached. And let's face it, everything is attackable. Everything, we can get into everything. It's the big thing at this point is like knowing when and knowing what to do about it. So companies don't think that way. Companies think, I've closed the front door, we're in good shape.
Yeah. So, when I think about security, the data model is what I focus on. And fundamentally, the data model hasn't changed from the very beginning. It is about, how you treat the data. If you can just download as much as you want unencrypted, then you are essentially inviting, problems. And so encryption is so important and we don't, as even in the military, we secure data in transport a lot of the times, but we don't secure it. Once it gets to its destination, we're like, oh, we unlock it, we unencrypt it. And to your point, it's all about convenience. And it can't be about convenience when, in essence, you're saying, you have a bunch of jewelry and you've got bandits that are basically walking around your home, and you're not going to lock up your jewelry because you may at any instant want to change those, big earrings for, set of, diamond studs.
Right. And that's, again, same thing, perfect way of doing it. I think part of it is, so look at security. Security has had to grow up. We've literally had to make shit up as we've gone along, because there haven't always been solutions. Encryption's probably one of the most defining ones, because you and I remember, when we were dealing with encryption years and years ago, it was kludgy, it was complex, getting codes, getting keys, key rings, keychains on mainframes.
PGP. I remember PGP back in the late 90s.
Exactly. It was good, but man, it was a pain in the ass, and no average normal user stood a chance of dealing with it. But now when you fast forward, we have some amazing no password options. You've got FIDO alliances out there. You have things like TrueCertain. You got things, you got some of the other stuff that I'm dealing with other teams and other organizations that are out there that have systems that will work at an enterprise level, at a data at rest, data in motion, data in transit, all those other things. There's stuff there that will work effectively, and especially these days, much more elegantly, but it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes money to put it into place. And again, if I come into an organization and I argue with my auditor and go, I have a compensating control, I think I can do this, I know I'm doing this, and the auditor's like, the auditor wants to come back next year. They want to get a check in the box and they want to come back next year. And the company browbeats, as opposed to welcoming the auditor in and going, hey, help me understand what my problems are. Come in as a friendly and help me understand what's going on. It's a much more adversarial relationship, and that's not how it should be.
So in the companies you deal with, what percentage would you say are that way, and what percentage are just basically, I got to go through this, as soon as you can get out, the better. What does it look like? What does the state of play out there in say that in the Fortune 500?
I think so. Fortune 500 is interesting. I think there's a lot over the last couple of years. There's a lot of companies that have actually stepped up. The state stuff I just dealt with, the voting system, I'm really pleased with them because they stepped up and they've been very, very proactive at going, help us understand and help us learn. That's refreshing, but I would argue there's still a decent percentage in the Fortune 500 that are like, just get it done and get the hell out of here as quickly as you can and give us our tick in the box. And the argument for saying that is if that wasn't the case, we wouldn't have as many high-profile breaches as we still have.
So we've been talking about what I would call kind of, I don't know what version you would call this, but talking about hacking of systems, of data systems, of computers. Now today what we have in our modern system is hacking of brains. And what I'm talking about there is whether you're using the algorithms of Google or Facebook or Amazon to get you to buy stuff, or whether you're taking Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent and getting you to believe a narrative. Do you work in those areas? Are you primarily still confined to this idea that I want to protect organizations from losing their data? And if you are in kind of the TikTok world, is what I'm talking about. What advice would you have, or kind of what's your sense of where we're at right now? Vis-a-vis the rest of the world, just here in the United States.
We're in poor shape. I mean, let's be perfectly honest. We are in really poor shape. I do spend a lot of time in that world. Actually, ironically, on LinkedIn this past week, I just put an entire series out. I did almost like a caricature version, and I put out 5 social engineering tabletop scenarios. And 1,300 characters in a LinkedIn post, and you've got to make it really succinct. So I gave 5 very easy, simple scenarios that I run across on a regular basis where it's purely simply human engineering. It's everything from, me calling up. I mean, you think about it. Again, go back to the military world. If your superior calls you up and they are hot and they are steaming and they're pissed, you're going to do whatever you can to de-escalate that situation. And so in the civilian world, we do the same thing. I'm going to be the CEO of the company. I'm hot and I'm steaming. I'm going to call up the accounting department. I'm pissed. I'm going into a meeting. I haven't seen the money yet. It hasn't been wired yet. Here's the account number. Get this shit done now. And you wire the money. And then the following morning, the CEO goes, hey, why are we $250,000 less? Well, I sent it to you. And then that whole WTF happens. And I mean, that's one of the 5 scenarios I chucked out this week, and I'm actually going to keep it going for the next several weeks because I want people to start thinking. The human, unfortunately, has been left behind. And it's not that the weakest link, it's not that we can't be trained, it's not any of those things. It's simply that we got ignored because what happened is everybody went, oh, technology will solve the problem. And we've realized technology can't solve the problem. We've forgotten about the human, and we've forgotten about the processes, and we just concentrated on all the blinky light stuff. And so now we've had to take a step back and go, how do we deal with the human? How do we educate them? How do we train them effectively? As well as how do we help protect them in their personal life? Because that's so bleeding into the work life. I mean, it's now one life, especially with COVID around us. And we have so much work to do that, and we still want to train them the old-fashioned way, which is another problem. We basically want to look at them once every quarter or once a year. And again, you know this because I was training the National Guard last year and earlier this year as well. And I stood up in front of quite a lot of folks, and I'm like, okay, how many of you go through awareness training in the military? And everybody's like, oh, yes, absolutely. I'm like, okay, how often do you go through it? Oh, at least once a year, possibly once a quarter. I'm like, so was it the same training this year that you did last year? And do you have the answers written down on a Post-it? And they're like, oh,
yes.
It's...
How fast can I get through this computer-based training? That's what I remember.
Yeah, and that's it. And that's it. We don't train for the human. We train for the tick in the box and the audit. So that when TikTok comes along and when all these other social media, when Facebook asks you, let me tell you what your cat character is by asking you these 6 social engineering questions. We're like, oh, absolutely. I was born in this country and I did this. Your cat character is a deep black, whatever the heck character, a cat from the Bronx, And then meanwhile, somebody behind the scenes is like, yes, I've got all that human information. It's just, we don't think.
Yeah, my wife is totally wise to all of those things. So she it is hilarious if somebody calls our house and tries to get personal. Forget about it. It's not going to happen. You're not going to get any personal. It is if you're God. You could be God and you would not get any personal information. Sorry, ain't going to happen. Moses, you're out.
Yeah, that's it. Give me a callback number. Click. But that's the challenge. You've grown up in that world. I've grown up in that world. In the US, we have, out of what we got, like 350, 360 million, 330 million people, maybe 3-4 million, maybe 5 million are cynical enough to deal with this stuff. Probably most of the people in the Midwest are cynical enough to deal with it. And so many of the other people are just sitting there and they don't think about it. It's an instant, yeah, okay, I'll do this. And all of a sudden you realize you just lost everything.
Let me give you a scenario because I want to know if this is something that you think about too, because it's something that I think about. Somebody asked me in the military, somebody that does acquisition, asking me about a company. It was a drone company, and they said, what do you think about this drone company? And so I Googled the name and found it, went on LinkedIn, and I found out that their quality assurance engineer went to Jiao Tong University. So I'm like, well, okay, you have this problem. Are these some of the things that you think about as well, or is it more again isolated on because when you go to the point, and there's so much corollaries here, right? Because when we talk about aircraft accidents, 80% or 90% are human error. So there's so much of the human involved in understanding how do I secure my company, how do I secure my the crown jewels of what our intellectual property, and it's really not can I hire X company to put this exquisite security system in. In a lot of ways, it's the people that you hire to come into the company. So that scenario of hey, I'm looking at on LinkedIn this person comes from China. They're, clearly their family's in China, which means the Chinese Communist Party has the ability to exert control over them, and yet they're in a key position in my company. Is that something that comes up in what you're working on, and how does that usually play out when you if you do talk to the companies that you do business with?
Yeah, it definitely comes out because it's you mentioned China, but obviously there's brain drain going to other countries as well, especially. And we saw that play out fairly recently in the news, where it was Tesla. One of the individuals in Tesla was offered a decent chunk of change to plug in a USB drive from somebody from a foreign country and a foreign entity, and to their credit, like serious credit, they actually said no, and they didn't do it, and they reported it, and they actually ended up getting a sting operation going with the agency. That's huge. And I think, again, that comes into a risk profile. We still think of risk as digital risk. We still think of risk in the old days of, did I lock my front door? Unfortunately, what tends to happen is when we bring people inside a company, we automatically assume that they're good people. we've forgotten this whole problem about insider trading, about insider situations. Again, go back to the First World and Second World War. The whole loose lips sink ships mentality is who has to know, needs to know, and should know. Right, those are the only people that need to know. And by the way, I know I can trust you because not only have I done a background, but I know your friends and your family. I know where they are. I know the influences on them, and therefore I'm okay with it because I've done my due diligence. We don't do that so much, and unfortunately, it's a tough one because it's a balance, because there is some amazing technology coming out of other countries that we do need to leverage and we do need to work with, but we need to do it with open eyes. We've done it for years. We've done it for years with India, and we start looking at where all the data, where all the intellectual property is going between those two countries. China being another perfect example. You look at stuff in Germany, Russia, not Soviet Union. You look at those necks of the woods and go, I'm happy to work with you. I'm happy to bring you in, and I'm happy to deal with the projects. But please understand, as I do this, just the same that you would do with me if I went to your country, I would want to do more due diligence. I would want to understand more what potential risks I'm bringing in. That's you and I, and we preach that to a lot of the companies we deal with. But again, so many people don't think that way.
Yeah, and so you brought up something here that just absolutely infuriates me, because you brought up the Tesla issue. Tesla, so that person fessed up, but there is somebody that Tesla has sued for stealing their self-driving car data. By the way, also an Apple engineer tried to do the same thing with their self-driving car technology. The same company that is accused of having people that bring that technology to them, Xpeng, Xpeng, I don't know if you heard about it, just got $1.5 billion on the New York Stock Exchange in an IPO. And I'm like, these guys are stealing technology, and Wall Street is IPOing them, and that $1.5 billion doesn't go to the company, it goes to the PBOC, the People's Bank of China. This is the problem with our country right now that I see, and it pertains the entire free world.
Yeah, no dispute on that one at all in any way, shape, or form. I saw that, and I'm like, congratulations, we have just rewarded the ability to steal other people's ideas. We know it happens. There was an amazing book that was put out 10, 15 years ago that was dealing with theft of intellectual property, actually using Germany as a border organization. And it was amazing to see the flow through Europe, then through Germany, and then back out to China, and then back out to Korea and various other places. And absolutely amazing, the industrial espionage that went on even with those organizations. And again, it's the human. It's back to you. It's that data model. Here's my crown jewels. The only people that should, need, will, do have access to it are those that I trust. It's that trust and validate, or validate, trust, and then, by the way, I'm going to continue to validate the hell out of you.
Okay, so without revealing what I know, I'm gonna ask you something. Supermicro. You remember the story, the Bloomberg story? This is a good one. So I have an informed opinion about that story, but I would like to hear your version.
Oh, that's an interesting one, because I come from even further back, which is years and years ago. Cisco, because Cisco's maintenance and support and equipment was pretty damn expensive. It's still expensive. People were buying gray market Cisco equipment that was being shipped over from China and Russia, and they'd plug it in and it would work beautifully, and they'd pay like 20 cents on the dollar for it, and it had a back-end VPN tunnel back to those machines. And it was
same misspelled in the manuals, misspellings.
Yeah. And so that was, I remember dealing with some of that back in those days, and some of the issues around it. Then you're right, fast forward to the Supermicro stuff. That's a tough one, because, again, having worked with some of the folks out of DC, I'm very well aware of what we can do and what we're capable of doing without tipping our hand. And I think that was the interesting one. If you look at subterfuge and deception, to me, that was almost too obvious of something that was going on. And it's that sleight of hand. If I see something over here, I'm missing a lot of stuff that's going on over here. And I think Do I believe that we have bugged systems coming into this country? Absolutely. Do I believe? I mean, yes. Do I believe that the journal and some of the other people would have found some of that stuff? If they did, it was meant to be found, as opposed to the real stuff that hasn't been found.
Well, I think the backstory when it finally comes out is actually going to be even more interesting than that. And I do think that was probably, I think it'll go down and I think the outcome of that is we're going to question really how we think of, the vulnerabilities, to our society that exist in a cyber sense or in a digital sense versus in a physical sense. Because, in a lot of ways, I think we tend to have this view, and when I say we, here I'm thinking loosely the intelligence community, we have this view that if I find a problem, I take note of it. I don't do anything, though, because it gives me an opportunity to continue to observe. And this is what I think is probably the most egregious. It is as if you notice in your picket, and when I say a picket, in your security, you notice that somebody has gone missing and there's a gap in your security. And you want to watch to see who comes in rather than saying, oh my God, there's a gap in our security. We better cover that up. This is so, thoughts on,
and it's,
I'm sure you've run into this idea.
Oh my. I've probably been part of that problem in some ways because, again, there's a couple of things on this one, and it's actually a really, really good point. Perfect way of putting it. NSA came out a couple of months ago and said, hey, we found vulnerabilities in this and we're going to tell everybody about it. The cynics among us were like, well, you guys have probably known about this for the last 10 years. And, unfortunately, now somebody else has cottoned on, so you're just going to get ahead of the news and be nice people. Because let's face it, that probably is reality, because we find so many bugs and issues in systems. And quite honestly, there is an ethical conversation to happen, which is, let's say I find a vulnerability in, and we'll talk about these in a minute, I find a vulnerability in a phone. I can go to Apple and say, hey, I've got a vulnerability. Apple writes me a checkout, or I go to BugCrowd or HackOne. They write me a checkout, and I go off on my merry way. I can also take that vulnerability, go to the US intelligence community and say, hey, I've given you another opportunity to keep an eye on things because potentially it could save lives. There is that discussion. Now, the problem is if I do that, the community at large, our 330 million people running around with these blasted phones, don't get the benefit of getting better coverage. Flip side is, I hopefully protect a bunch of folks that are going in situation or into theater that otherwise would have compromised the communication for. It's a nasty balance. And I think the micro thing was probably one. I mean, another example on this one, FBI, perfect example. FBI basically turned and said, we need access, we need to be able to crack mobile phones. A lot of us in the industry were like, well, go ask the guys down the road from you out in the, on the East Coast. But they can't do that, or even if they can, those agencies aren't going to tip their hand, because darn well as soon as you tell the FBI that this is on there, it's going to end up in court, at which point we lose our advantage. And so they end up having to go over to, obviously, Israel and get it done that way. And it's frustrating as all heck, because it's like, what do I want? Do I want to protect the masses by telling them and helping protect them? Or do I want to protect the masses by still being able to pull in intelligence and information because people don't realize how far into their systems we actually are?
Yeah. So, I think that, this is really getting to the crux of the problem. And that is data security, and data being the oil of the 21st century, the thing that drives artificial intelligence and big data and machine learning and all of that. Is that the thing that we should be protecting? Or should we protect our prerogative when it comes to having access to other data? So, this is a classic military problem. Do I focus on the offense or do I focus on the defense? I've come to the conclusion that if we don't focus on the defense in the United States, and by the way, I think the Chinese and the Russians have figured this out, which is why the Russians basically figured out that, hey, we need to be able to disconnect from the global internet, and the Chinese built a great firewall.
Exactly,
we haven't figured this out. And I think the authoritarians, having to control their society, were the first ones to recognize that if we don't control this, if we don't, as Clinton said, nail Jello to the wall, which he said they couldn't do, and they clearly have done, then we're going to be in big trouble in terms of controlling our population. So it's really about understanding where the 21st century is going in terms of what is the biggest threat to your society. I think that's where we've completely lost the bubble, and preserving our ability to look into other systems is not as important as protecting the ability or preventing the ability of other outside state actors of looking into our system. I think that's the key idea here. If you go back to, for example, and I'm gonna go into a little bit of Cold War deterrence theory here.
Yeah.
An Air Force mathematician, a guy named Lieutenant General Glenn Clanton, a good book, good monograph that he wrote called Thinking About Defense. And what he found was that in 1963, it would cost $28 billion to protect 70% of America from a nuclear attack, to create a defensive umbrella. But to protect 90% of the population would cost 6 times that. The other thing that he found was that for every dollar that the Soviet Union added to their ICBM force, we would have to spend $6 in defense. And so it was economically infeasible. And so I think that's where mutually assured destruction came from. This is where this idea came from. We're going to focus on growing our economy, our science and technology, and we're just going to tell the Soviet Union, if you do anything, it's all out war. And so it was this deterrence theory that kind of was our main theory of victory in the Cold War. But I think today in the 21st century, where having your data is such an important advantage for artificial intelligence and growing both the economy and your ability to control populations, that the reverse is true. We're spending $800 billion a year on defense, and we ought to be spending it on protecting the data of our citizens. And I think that's where, you're on the front lines of that. Do you agree with that? Because, that's a conclusion I've come to.
It's hard to disagree with it, because you hit two of the major ones. Obviously, China's got the Great Firewall, and they have a huge force leveled against us. Absolutely. In the digital world, they have a massive force leveled against us. I don't know what the exact ratios are, but we're outnumbered quite considerably. You look to your point, what Russia has done with the ability to disconnect, but then you come back to some of our friends. You look at what a couple of the countries in the Nordic world have done. They have put protections around their basically borders, and they put protections around their citizens. You look at what Israel has done. Israel knows every single year it's going to get hit by Op Israel, and also all the countries around it are doing everything on the physical and the digital world to do everything they can. They have an entire section of that team looking at protecting their internal cities and their borders. We don't have that. It's basically we're all for ourselves at this point in time. It's the mentality is basically it's like, hey, you got your Second Amendment, you got your gun, good luck. By the way, the Second Amendment is now you got your computer, good luck, hope you can do okay. That's it. That's not going to work. And I think we should spend now, the challenge on that one is the mentality of the US, the population of the US, is I want to look after myself. Don't you dare take my guns. Don't you dare threaten my bloody guns. Don't do anything with my identity, my people, or anything else. I can look after myself. And I think we have to convince people in the physical world, you got it covered. You can see them coming a mile away. In the digital world, that's not the same way. A very good friend of mine says we are analog humans in a digital world. And I don't think so many people look that way, feel that way, or understand it. We can't see the enemy coming in the digital world in the same way that we can in the physical world. So we have to take a different tactic. And quite honestly, that data that we're trying to protect, there has to be somebody that takes a step back and goes, look, we will take care of it. The problem is those custodians of the data at the moment are the Googles, are the Apples, are the Microsofts of the world. And let's face it, they're not there to protect us. They're there to make as much freaking money as they can. And that's one of my biggest problems.
Yeah, and when I talk about the Second Amendment, I think this is such a good point, because if you think about the whole point of the Second Amendment is to provide the citizenry the ability to resist an oppressive government. But we have created a world now where you can be oppressed without knowing who your oppressor is, or even that you're being oppressed. And so in that world, it's nice to have a gun, but you're likely to be encouraged to kill your neighbor because you think your neighbor is the enemy because, somebody else has convinced you of this fact. This is the problem that we have today, and why I think it's so important for us to focus on data security and data sovereignty, and really understanding, what is the influences coming from outside our borders, and certainly how social media and the whole e-commerce environment is used to condition our responses in ways that are, quite frankly, imperceptible to us.
Well, so I'll add something onto your data security, and it's something we've noticed over the last several years. And artificial intelligence is a huge challenge when it comes to this. It's the integrity of that data. Right. So it isn't just me breaking in, stealing the darn stuff and selling it. It's me breaking in and changing that data effectively and very subtly in such a way that all of a sudden, no longer do you not like people who are colored red, you don't like people who are colored green either. Because I've changed the metrics, I've changed the subtleties, I've influenced that data without actually without disrupting it. And to your point, we're seeing it with social media, we're seeing it with disinformation campaigns, we're seeing it with everything. I mean, Microsoft just released something last couple of days, they finally announced it, and there's actually a couple of companies over in Israel doing something similar, where they are specifically hunting for disinformation, links, sites, people, URLs, all sorts of stuff. I mean, there's a ton of that out there, and to me, it's the integrity of that data as well that comes into question.
Right, that's a good point. And I think, so if you think about this in a use case example, I'll use the military. So you have an algorithm that is looking for the enemy tanks, and you condition that data so that as that algorithm is being developed, as that learning is taking place, there are holes in it so that when it does come to your tank, it's not identified. I mean, that's one example of, I think that's what you're getting at, is does the algorithm do what you intended it to do? Well, if the data has anomalies in it, then that algorithm may, in certain cases, not do what it was intended to do.
Totally. Well, the other thing is as well, I mean, you and I have, I spent time in foreign countries getting shot at, let's face it. I knew who was shooting at me. I was very well aware of and I was very well aware of what they were shooting at me with. I saw it coming. I knew what was going on, and if I didn't, we had enough time to get cover. We don't have that in the digital world. I can't do attribution. I don't know whose hand or whose fingers are on that damn trigger, let alone why, and let alone the motivation and everything else. This is one of the biggest challenges I see. We have a lot of people who stand up and go, hey, we need to hack back. I'm like, don't do that shit. You're going to basically hack some poor grandma's computer in North Korea because, well, that's where we're all congregating because it's fun to blame them every 5 minutes. And I think that's the biggest problem is we in the digital world have a much harder time figuring out who our enemy actually is, or even where they're coming from half the time. And that's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, and something that we need to work on. Well, Chris, this has been a fantastic conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. I really have enjoyed it. I've enjoyed having you on. Hope to have you on again. Thanks for being on. Generally speaking, I really admire your work, and we need more people like you. We have a lot of people shooting guns and driving planes like I used to do, but we need a lot more that are defending our digital spaces.
Working on it. Thank you. Absolute honor and a pleasure to be on. Thank you very, very much, sir. Much appreciated.
Thank you.